Hi, welcome to this webinar on the new Bartell and Bartell Conflict Management Style Assessment. Today, we're going to look at why we created this new assessment, the exciting new layers of insight that it gives us. We're going to discuss what it measures, how it differs from the previous version, and especially we're going to focus on how to interpret it and how to use it, particularly in selection and development. If you're watching this, you know Bartell and Bartell. You've probably been using our assessments. You've probably been certified on our assessments by taking FBI, Flying by Instruments. And you're curious about this new conflict assessment. You might have some questions. We'll answer as many of those as we can. And as always, we're here to help and be a resource to you. You might be wondering who we are. We should do some introductions. What do you think? My name is Steve Lutz. I'm one of the leadership development consultants at Bartell and Bartell. With me are my two distinguished colleagues, Dr. Jared Detter and Clara Teft. Hi, Jared. Hi, Clara.
Hello.
In case you haven't met either of these wonderful individuals, Jared is a clinical psychologist by trade with a really interesting background, not only in private practice, but in the Air Force, in law enforcement, and even hostage negotiation. So he brings great depth and breadth of knowledge and experience to the topic of conflict. And Clara, Clara, you not only know our instruments inside and out, but you've worked with many of the people watching this, I'm sure, and you're our lead designer, and you use the knowledge of all of our instruments to communicate the insights visually. So if you're watching this, and if you see a Bartell product that looks good, it's because of Clara. If it doesn't, it's because she just didn't get to it yet. So Jared and Clara, thanks for jumping on the call today.
You're welcome.
And listen, we were talking before the call about some of the things in the pipeline. Anytime we create a new assessment at Bartell, it's a team effort. But Jared and Clara, you were both integral to the conception and the design and development and eventual launch of this assessment. So grateful to have you both with us today and can't wait to throw some questions at you. Jared and Clara, this is the first time we have done something like this, a webinar like this, but I was realizing we're probably going to need to do this again, right? Because there are some more things in the pipeline. Probably quite a few people on this call have seen the refresh of the personality vector analysis that's about to officially launch. Clara, you did a beautiful job on that, really cleaned it up, made it look pretty, made it much more easier to read. I often get like a very audible sigh when people are like, that is so much easier to read on this new one. So we're all very grateful for that. And that's following on the heels of the refreshed Leadership Alignment Index, LAI, as well as leadershiptemplate.com. We should definitely do a webinar on that one at some point. What do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's a new organizational stage assessment that we've just started using. Pretty excited about that. There's the new DISC certification course that's fully online. You can get certified and do everything DISC online. Jared, you've been producing some very helpful ebooks on various topics. I could see several of those perhaps becoming assessments at some point. What's kind of your favorite, or what's your go-to on the ebooks?
Well, there's a couple of them. The conflict management actually is probably the most requested one, which is interesting because that's what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
With our new assessment, or at least the revamped assessment. A couple of other ones I think that people are asking for pretty consistently is the one on developing culture in the organization, what kind of levers you can pull to really help culture be successful. And then one of the more recent ones that people seem to have an interest in is the one on the science of succession planning, which is really kind of making that topic much more concrete for organizations. They can really develop an organizational competency around that idea.
Yeah, love that. We recently did a special flight school for C-suite executive level leaders, and that landed really well with them. And so what I love about all this stuff is that we're creating stuff that's based on the needs that our clients are raising. We're doing something in the pipeline on work-life balance as well. And we have some plans for follow-up resources on everything that gets measured in AMP. So pretty excited about that. And then There's one more I'm pretty excited about in the pipeline. We haven't even named it yet, but it's essentially like a comprehensive human capital and organizational capability assessment. Delves into every area that HR deals with from micro to macro and identifies areas to work on. That's going to be really exciting. Anything I'm forgetting there?
I don't think so. That sounds
Yeah.
pretty good.
All that to say, like, man, it's an exciting time, and as many of you watching this will know, when Bartell and Bartell was founded over 40 years ago, we were pioneers in organizational and leadership technologies. And I have to say, it's a very exciting time here because it feels like a fresh wave of innovation and development and rolling out resources that our clients are asking for. So very exciting. I'm sure we'll have to be doing more of these webinars in the future. And for clarity's sake, as we talk about the new conflict assessment, we should mention that sometimes we're rolling out like a visual refresh of an assessment, right? It's not necessarily a brand new product, although it much improved, easier to read, like the PVA. Sometimes it's a refresh, but sometimes it is a brand new assessment, right? And that's what we're talking about here with the new conflict management style assessment. This isn't just cosmetic changes, though it looks really nice, Clara, but it's new questions and there's some new categories. So let's start with some questions about the new assessment, and then we'll get into reading some example versions. So Jared, let me go to you here. Why a new conflict management style assessment? A lot of us like the old one. There's a lot of good stuff in the old one. So why a new one, and maybe how is it different from the old one?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Steve. I would say there's a couple of drivers that really helped us develop this new idea around this assessment. And just to kind of give the audience a little bit of background, conflict management is a space that I've been working in for almost 2 decades. All the way back to when I was in graduate school getting my doctoral degree in clinical psych. Uh, I was learning about conflict, trying to understand models on it, see which ones were the most effective, and really getting my head wrapped around the most effective way to work through conflict with people. Because obviously, as a psychologist, I'm seeing conflict even in the therapy room when a couple comes in, and how do I manage this in a way that's helpful for them and gets their brain wrapped around what's really going on, and how do I understand the different styles that people have with conflict. And so when I left the clinical world and came into the consulting world, those same kind of models applied and worked really well inside of organizations to help people see the dynamics and understand conflict and all of those things that we see inside of organizations, even on a day-to-day basis sometimes. So when I joined Bartell, one of the things that I took a look at this conflict management assessment is there's just a couple of elements that it really wasn't hitting on very well. One of which, just as a for example, was there is a style of managing conflict called being passive aggressive, and that never was really captured in that in our original conflict management assessment. And when we think about somebody being passive aggressive, this is somebody like when they lose a fight, so to speak, in the workplace, they begin to ruminate on it, right? They go back to their office and they think about all those things they should have said to the other person, and they really kind of get a little bitter about how the dynamic is going, and so they work to undermine the other person. And instead of talking to the person about the issue they have, they talk about the person they had the issue with, and they tend to recruit people to their side against the other person and really kind of engage in undermining behaviors. And as I thought about the work that we do with organizations in a pre-hire scenario, wouldn't it be great to know if somebody was coming into an organization with a primarily or at least a higher passive aggressive mode of dealing with conflict? And we really weren't picking up on things like that in the original assessment. And so that just kind of gives you a for example of why we decided to switch things up a little bit. And all we really did is, if you go back to those 4 original circles that we had in the conflict management, we just split each of those circles in 2.
Yeah.
And when we're going to look at a sample report a little bit more, so we really have not departed from the original idea of how we're measuring conflict. We have just dug in deeper and gotten more specific. We're sort of cutting it with a sharper knife. so to speak, when we look at conflict. So we have not departed from the original idea. We still have those four basic modes of managing conflict. We've just split each one into two and are looking at it. And I would say the second thing that we're really
Jared, could
doing,
I
and
just pause you right there?
sure,
So just to kind of put some clarity on this, in the old assessment, say the top left, we called it aggressive confrontive, but we were often having to make some guesses, educated guesses, using other assessments to say, well, I wonder, are they aggressive or are they confrontive, right? Or, we would have to sort of subdivide that on a more conjectural basis, whereas now we actually are measuring which mode within that circle, so to speak. Is that fair to say?
that is absolutely accurate. And just to kind of pull on the string that you are talking about, that aggressive confrontive, we really split into two that are competing and subduing, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're really talking about two different styles within that. And just kind of as a for example, the competing style is really, I'm not going to let someone win. I'm not going to back down, right? I'm a dog with a bone. I'm just not going to let it go. I don't want to lose. Whereas the subduing style basically says, if you go toe to toe with me, I'm going to take you out at the knees. And you're really, I'm gonna take you down. And those are different styles, but they're all within
Yeah,
that aggressive confrontive style. So yes, you're exactly correct.
good. Thanks.
Yeah.
You were about
So
to make a second point.
yeah. So the second point, and I think this was brought up by Clara, actually, if my memory serves me correctly, when we were having early discussions about how we might adjust this. And that is that the assessment, the original assessment, largely was not focused on work specific scenarios. It just asks you to kind of create a frame of reference and kind of carry that frame of reference through the assessment.
Mm-hmm.
And many questions that I had, I'm sure Steve and Clara, you've had something similar. People are like, well, I feel like I'm a little different than this at work. I feel like I was pulling some of the family stuff that I've got going on. And so I think that was a great point that Clara made. And so that was a major adjustment that we had, is a much higher percentage of the questions, the frame of reference that we're prompting is the workplace scenario. And we'll see as we get a little deeper into this discussion that shifted a little bit where some of the point balances fall across the four different styles.
Yeah, that's great. Great points. So it's more nuanced. We're diving a little deeper. We're able to categorize it a little bit more clearly in terms of what was four circles. Now there's more depth there, and also it's more work focused, which is, after all, why people are taking this assessment. So
Mhm.
so if you get really mad and yell at your kids when you step on Legos for the third time in an evening, right? And you might yell at them, that won't necessarily show up in the new assessment.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
If your colleagues are putting out Legos for you to step on, then perhaps it would. Yes. So Clara, you've been very involved on the design of this. And so tell us a little bit about how you kind of took the old assessment. We knew the four colors. The colors made sense, could kind of see that. And you've made some, it looks beautiful. It's really easy to read. Tell us about some of your thoughts in terms of the design and why it looks the way it does.
Yeah, like any assessment that we have redesigned in the past couple years, the whole goal is to make it quicker to absorb the information. And
Mhm.
so having basically a summary graph and then extra information toward the bottom is kind of the layout that we've been using in general. And so the goal here was, just like the previous conflict assessment, to be able to quickly see at the top, all right, if they're going to engage versus disengage in conflict, how are they going about it in general using those four different styles?
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
that's where you get that circular graph from. And then on the outside of that, you start to see the breakdown. Are they aggressive? Or sorry, are they passive aggressive, or are they more likely to just give into the conflict? Are they likely to connect with people versus assert their opinion? So you can really start to see the breakdown from there.
Mhm.
In general, trying to move away from just simply stating numbers, because I think that creates more questions than, the actual information being absorbed. And so we're moving a little bit more toward percentages, which I think that anyone can really get when they start to look at an assessment. And
Mhm.
so kind of shifted toward that way, while trying to also integrate some of the other aspects of the previous assessment so that there's this kind of smooth transition as far as interpreting it them goes.
Yeah, brilliant. And I can't wait for you both to walk us through a sample assessment, and in a second I'll ask you to pull that up. But so I'm sure one question people might be having though is, should we not use the old assessment anymore? Should we have people take both? What are your thoughts on that? On the old one, the new one? Are they complements? Does one supersede? How should we view that?
I had a quick thought on that. So it's not like if you have a strong conflict style in general, it's not going to be easy to hide your idiosyncrasies anyway. You're going to see some of that overlap in work to an extent. However, like Jared was saying, it is measuring two different things. Now we're really focusing on in the workplace or your organization. How do you approach conflict with people who are not necessarily your closest friends or your family?
Yeah.
And so you could use both if you wanted to get the perspective of outside of work and inside of work. But for the most part, with the clients that we've spoken to, the inside of work is just going to be a little bit more relevant for what that's worth.
Good. Good. All right. Well, let's take a look at an actual result page, and I'd love for the two of you to walk us through that, get us oriented. So for folks who would be debriefing or using this in assessment situations for candidates, things of that nature.
Right. Give me one sec. Able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Jared, if you want to walk a little bit like around the styles and describe what basically this is telling us, I think that would be helpful. And then I'll go into a bit of the nitty gritty if you'd like.
That's awesome. Thanks, Clara. So as you can see at the top of the screen, you see confront, persuade, reflect, and avoid. Those are the four same basic circles that we talked about, right? So the confront, which was the red one, would be the upper left circle on the previous assessment. The persuade would be the upper right, the reflect would be the lower left, and the avoid would be the lower right. So we have not departed from the four categories that we had in the previous ones, but like Clara had said, we're really representing it visually in terms of proportion now. So that you can see extremely fast where people put their eggs, so to speak, in which basket. In this particular one, you'll see that we still have that style strength score in the middle, and this one is a negative. We treat it the same way we treated the negative scores before. So we're trying to keep much of the format the same so that when you look at it, you're pretty sure, oh yeah, -44, essentially, I get that. That's a style strength that says we tend to move away from conflict when it happens for this person. And so if you look at the bottom of the page here, you can see where we're really measuring kind of in the old scale these different breakouts. So you can see that the persuade score or the old assertiveness score has a score of a 53. The reflect has a score of a 74, essentially. The avoid a score of 23, and the confront a score of 0. So you can see the points broken down there. But what we're really looking at here now is the 8 subcategories that we talked about. Now, I already mentioned the compete versus subdue, so I won't really mention that one again, but just to kind of break down the other 4 in a very brief scenario, you can see on the avoid category, you have the concede versus ruminate. The concede is simply, oh gosh, when I'm in the midst of a conflict, this is making me uncomfortable. I'm just going to give ground. And that's really going to solve the problem. In reality, it doesn't solve the problem. It kicks the can down the road, but at least you've just given ground and the conflict has kind of gone away. And then you can see that ruminate one, that's really the passive aggressive component where people just really don't want to let go when they've lost. When we move a little bit to the right at the bottom on the reflect category, which is in blue, that Clara is kind of pointing at, we have the examine and the empathize. So the empathize really is the tendency for people when they do take a step back. This reflect category is not kind of running away like the avoid category is. It's simply kind of taking a step back. And the empathize part of it is the recognition that gosh, if this person's a little bit spun up, I'm not going to be able to solve the problem while they're spun up. So I just want to bring them down. I want to de-escalate them. That's really that person's mode of working there. And then the examine side is really about trying to be almost like a questioner to say, okay, where is this person coming from? Let me get at what's behind it so I can understand better where this part of conflict is coming from. So this is really that reflect side, is simply a step back to either calm someone down or to gather some more information. And then finally, there's the persuade category, which is assert and connect. And the connect is really about using relational equity to try to change somebody's mind. To say, hey, there's a different perspective on this, and I want you to see this different perspective. And I'm going to use reason and rationality and relational equity to kind of talk you through why I think there's a different perspective. And then the assert category is really, I'm not going to put up with this. Essentially, there's a boundary that's going to be set, and if you violate this boundary again, then there are going to be consequences to it, which is also an assertive way of being. It's just a much more direct, boundary oriented way of looking at things. And so those are really now the 8 subcategories that we're looking at in this new conflict management style survey. And I think one of the beautiful things that we've got with this now is we have some explanatory pages that follow on that talk about each of these 8 styles, what it looks like, what are some common behaviors that you're going to see in each of these 8 styles, and then when it's most appropriate perhaps to use those styles. And so that can be really helpful. But right now, I think, Clara, it might be good for you to chime in and say, this is really your thoughts about the design on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jared. Yeah, I mean, one of the questions that we'll get to with this new assessment is like, well, how do I go even about looking at this page? There is a lot of information on here still. And so this is kind of the thought behind the design, is where you can look first if you want to start with the details. Right here, disengage versus engage. Which one are they more likely to do? Previously, that was shown by the style strength score, but now we can just look right here. Clearly, with this person, they're much more likely to disengage. So perhaps we even take a deep dive there first. It's the 65 versus the 35%. So 65% of the time, likely to disengage. So let's break that down. Of those times that they're going to be disengaging, are they likely to reflect or to avoid? For this person, they're definitely more likely to reflect. They've definitely got some avoiding in here as well. But this is primarily where you're probably going to see them go in general. That's when you can look up here even too and see that about half the time this person is going to be reflecting during conflict. So that's pretty significant. Okay, so since it's so significant, it's worth taking some time to see when they are reflecting. Are they going to be empathizing? In other words, putting, themselves in that other person's shoes? Or are they going to be examining, taking a more logical approach? With this person, it seems to be pretty split even. Looks like they want to understand the other person from an emotional perspective and then also from a logical one, which makes a lot of sense for this individual. Again, so overwhelmingly leaning toward that disengaging sphere over here. And you would take it the same approach on the other side, right? So of that 35% of the time where they're going to be engaging, are they going to be persuading or confronting? For this person, it's almost always persuading. In fact, it actually is always persuading. They have 0 points for confront. That's not going to be uncommon to see, again, because a lot of places discourage that kind of confrontive nature. Same thing with avoiding. So we go over here. And again, just like that breakdown that Jared talked about, are they more likely to connect or assert? For this person, it's connecting. So this gives you, again, that kind of total breakdown. You can see of the times that they do X, do they do Y or Z? So you can see it all kind of play out. And then at the same time, this is telling you the exact same thing, but it's just all in one big summary, if that's helpful.
No, that's great, Clara. And if we remember on the old assessment, if we added up those points, it was 150, right? We still have that preserved here, right? So we designed it here. So if we add up the totals for these 4 columns, that should get us there to 150. So
yes. Yeah. Previously, you would take the disengaging points, so the bottom 2 circles, and subtract them from the engaging points. Engaging over here, remember it's persuade and confront, and then disengaging over here, reflect and void. That's why we still have that negative 43, and you can still do the math here. Okay, if you add up these two versus these two.
So Claire, you mentioned this 0 on confront. People should expect to see lower scores there. Tell us a little bit more about what they might be seeing that's different. Same person, but pretty different scores that you're noticing here between the two assessments.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that because of the change in the questions, we don't have like a quote average right now. We still are collecting that data.
Mhm.
However, we can assume, and we have been seeing this just anecdotally too, that people do tend to have higher scores in this reflect and persuade realm, because that's, again, what's encouraged. Now, just because there isn't a pure, like, you have to get this score in order for it to be healthy, does not mean that you can't still interpret what would be healthy for your team.
Mhm.
Overall, what you might notice is that as you move toward the outside, like that confronting realm or the avoiding realm, it becomes a little bit more like parent-child communication. So, of course, you wouldn't want those two, yellow and red, to be overwhelmingly high for the overall style. When you start to go more toward reflecting and persuading, in general, it tends to be a bit more adult to adult communication, which of course is encouraged.
Mhm.
So yeah, you'll see these be a little bit lower once again, because we're talking about organizational behaviors now. But
Mhm.
that doesn't mean at the same time that you're always going to see these be zeros. Now, any amount of confront or avoid that you see, I think, does tell a bit of a story of how they approach work
Mhm.
and conflict. I also want to mention, and we might have different opinions here among the consultants, but I think it's natural to have at least a little bit of everything. Not to say that you should use confront or avoid over reflecting and persuading. In fact, I would completely say this shouldn't be the case. But if you see a person with like a 1% for confront or 2% and a couple points over here for avoid, I might even actually just infer that they were being quite honest when they were taking the assessment and they were trying to look at each scenario individually. How would they truly approach it, rather
Mhm.
than all persuade and all reflect?
Yeah.
You guys
Yeah.
think about that?
If I could jump in on that, Clara, I think with the original assessment, if someone was trying to game it, they would game it by getting their persuade score higher.
Mhm.
In fact, I saw one person, I did a debrief whose overall their style strength was 150, and all the points were in the persuade, the assertive persuasive. Um, and so I'm like, I'm not really sure this was a real straightforward and honest assessment. And so when people are trying to, especially in a pre-hire scenario, when they're trying
Yeah.
to look good in the previous assessment, it was really that persuade, that assertive persuasive style that would start to grow in points.
Mhm.
What I've seen, kind of to your point, Clara, is that is not the way people are gaming the system now. It's more a reduction in the confront and avoid points that
Yeah.
that I have seen. So there was somebody who came through. I did a debrief where all their points were either reflect or persuade, right? And they had 0 points on avoid. They had 0 points on confront. And to your point, Clara, there is nobody on earth who never does either of the emotional styles of conflict management. I mean,
Mhm.
everybody has a bad day, right?
Yeah.
And there's going to be some percentage of the time that you're going to either avoid or confront. And I can see where most people, or where a certain percentage of people might have very low scores on confront. But
Mhm.
if they have low score in confront, I would expect to see avoid to be bigger,
Mhm.
right? I would not expect to see 0 points on both.
Right.
And so, what to your point, Clara, what I've seen is people are, there's a different pattern set now than what we saw in the first one, when I think people are not being straightforward ultimately.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And here's the thing too. Again, it's really about ratio, exactly to that point. You
Mhm.
don't want someone to be overly emotional during conflict. Even people who are naturally that way are like, I don't want to be emotionally,
Mhm.
too emotional during conflict. However, there is a time and a place where you would see it as being like, okay, that would be the natural reaction or go to during certain points of conflict. Like If someone is going to be confronting, for example, oftentimes what I'll see is they'll probably be competing. In other words, hey, I want to win this. They might see that workplace conflict as a debate, for example.
Yeah.
And maybe in some circumstances that actually could be necessary. However, you would hope that they don't see that tool as being applicable to every single type of conflict. So just to
Yeah.
Jared's point again, it might create some questions if you see only reflecting and only persuading. Because honestly, we're all humans, and it's
Yeah.
very, very unlikely that we're going to all stay extremely logical and just like sound-minded during every single debate or argument at work.
Right. So a
Yeah.
couple thoughts. Might we expect to see a correlation there with competitive on the image?
I would think if this is a pretty significant score, and by significant, I mean you might see confront be like between 5 and 15%. If all compete, you might go and look at the image and say, are they too competitive? What I have seen is yes, most of the time they're above a 5 for competitiveness, but that might not always be the case too. It could be that this score for conflict could be conditioned by their current work circumstances.
Yeah.
Maybe the team that they're working with is really competitive and that has brought that out of that person.
To your points about, people's attempts to game the system, we have some built-in validity detectors, correct? We have some ways of detecting if this is a result that we can be trusting, right?
Not,
I think.
yeah.
Go ahead, Claire.
I was
No,
just
you.
I was just gonna say, referencing the image is one of the ways that we can detect like validity. However, with this assessment itself, we don't actually have a validity score, if I'm not mistaken, Jared, on that.
No, you're correct. We don't have a validity score, but we have validity indicators, right? Which would be like people denying that they ever have an emotional response,
Yeah.
right? Those would be a validity indicator on it. As Clara mentioned earlier, we're still gathering a bunch of data to see what the averages fall out to be for this new one. And so another validity indicator, once we have that normative data, would be somebody who's very far removed from the way that things show up, like somebody getting 150 points on assertive, like I saw on that one assessment. I do think what to kind of go further a little bit on what Clara had mentioned, we are seeing a couple of shifts in score proportions. First of all, the percentage of scores showing up on confront or have dropped a little bit, and I think that the main reason for that is kind of what Steve was mentioning before, where you kind of yelling at your kids for putting the Legos out, and that may be socially acceptable to yell at your kids for putting the Legos out, but in organizational contexts and cultures, that really aggressive, confrontive, yelling style is not what we see. We actually don't see that much at all. And so in our most recent flight school that we had, I think the average number of points in confront was about 10, which seems to match what most cultures that I've seen. Interestingly, the highest score we had was 28 on that one. And as I talked through the conflict management, I talked through a scenario where a leader sort of lost his cool and went after somebody a little bit and got called to the principal's office for the behavior. The person who got the score of 28 sort of went like this. He's like, yeah, I did that once. I was like, interesting. That the person who did have that more aggressive response is the person who scored 28 points on the scale. So it doesn't happen often, but it does show up like it did with that person. The other way that the scores have shifted a bit is we're seeing more of the reflect style than the persuade style. And again, I think that's relative to the fact that we've asked questions that are work specific, where I see a lot. I just did a debrief with an organizational leader and a bunch of his teammates, the people who reported into him, and a number of them said, I think we need conflict management training. And it's not because there's conflict all the time in this organization, but they said we have a culture of niceness and we don't ever really solve the problems because we're not really doing the persuading style. We're doing the reflecting style a lot. And so I think that really matches why we're seeing that reflect style go up a little bit higher relative to the persuade style.
Yeah. Good. Really, really interesting reflections there. Reflections. So Jared, when you're talking through these 8 categories, I'm curious, is there one that is particularly damaging or dangerous?
Yeah, so I would really point to two, and that's the ruminate one and the subdue
Mm-hmm.
one. Those are two that you really don't want to see any significant amount of points on this. And so you'll see that this one in particular only has 2 points on ruminate. That means their style is not primarily passive aggressive.
Yeah.
But when you see the ruminate and when you see the subdue, it's when it's personal at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And you really don't want to see those with any significant amount of points there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because they're kind of opposite, aren't they? I mean, one's
Mhm.
passive aggressive, one's aggressive aggressive. They're at the opposite ends of the continuum, but they're pretty toxic, huh?
I might even
And I would
add,
imagine, oh, go ahead, Clara.
and you might actually be about to say this, but what's funny is think about someone who is just ruminating and like, I didn't get my word out, or should have said this, should have said that, talking about the conflict with like pals or coworkers. If that person were to snap, were to actually say what's on their mind, you'd see it as being subduing more likely than not once they get all that out there.
Yeah.
I might even see it as almost a circle, like they
A
come back
horseshoe. Yeah.
around. Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
Now some of this is hypothetical. It doesn't literally mean that if someone is high on ruminate that will happen, but the potential is way higher because of that.
Mhm.
They're weirdly connected. There's some overlap between subduing and ruminating.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so Clara, that wasn't what I was going to say, but you're exactly correct. When I do my little bit of a workshop on conflict management, the way I say is that the ruminate style or the conflict or the passive aggressive style, they're sort of like a volcano where it's like the magma of bitterness grows and grows and grows and grows, and they keep it all in until the pressure bursts, and
Mhm.
then they let somebody have it right between the eyes,
Yeah.
right? And that's that subdue style. So you're exactly correct. What I was going to say is that if you were to do this, give everybody on a team this assessment, if you were to see a lot of the ruminate
Mm,
among team members, you probably have somebody who's more of a subduer as the leader
mm.
of that team. So
That's
really
in-
just kind of an interesting dynamic that if you were to look at the team dynamics there, if everybody in a team took it, I think you'd see some of that too.
yeah.
Fascinating.
I,
Yeah.
I like that phrase, magma of bitterness. I'm gonna keep that one and use that.
Pretty good.
Nice and vivid. Uh, so let me hear both of you. So you're getting this person. If you were debriefing about this person to a hiring manager, what might be some things that you say? I mean, we've covered some of it, but how would you approach it?
One of the things that I would notice, and it goes for the old assessment as well, is sometimes when you see that really, again, high reflecting score over here with that avoidance as well, it makes me wonder, at least triggers the question, are there types of conflicts, topics, or a certain person or situations, or even an environment that makes them uncomfortable where they switch over to concede or
Mhm.
to avoid in general, just because that topic even came up? And so that could be a question to ask. And if it is the case, the way to hopefully get them out of that zone is to get them, as soon as they start to feel that feeling of, I want to get out of here, or I have nothing to contribute, or I just want them to win so we can get this over with, get them to ask 5 questions before they dip out.
Yeah.
How did you come to that conclusion? Who agrees with you? Do you have data to back that up? Where would that lead us? Yada, yada. And they can leave the conversation after that. But it's almost like exposure therapy in a weird way, because it's like you're getting them talking and thinking in situations that normally would have made them uncomfortable. And
Mhm.
hopefully
Mhm.
over time, if they can gain some comfort in those kinds of scenarios, perhaps even in future, they could be more comfortable sharing an opinion in those scenarios as well. And so again, when you see someone with a higher avoidance score, you want to check and see, is it because there's something that they fear in
Mhm.
certain kinds of conflict?
Mhm. Brilliant.
Yeah. I think that's awesome, Clara, and I think you're definitely correct on that. The way that I look at this as well is their highest percentage of points on the reflect side is in the empathize, right?
Mhm.
So now Clara did point out it's pretty evenly split, but just slightly higher in the empathize, and the empathize really is about de-escalating people who are emotional. And what I've seen in conflict management, and you can see with this person in particular, they only have 23 points in the emotional styles total.
Yeah.
So they would definitely prefer the logical style of managing conflict. So if I were to throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks on this one, my guess is that if that empathize approach doesn't work and they're not able to de-escalate, then they switch to concede.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They give ground. They back off and they say, okay, you have your way. Hopefully that will calm you down. And I see that a lot with people is that they're able to manage conflict fairly well until it gets has that sort of strong emotional valence to it, and then they don't know what to do, and then they just sort of avoid either by conceding, as you can see with this person. Um, and that really kind of parallels, I think, what you were saying, Clara, very nicely. The other thing that I would look at with this one is although we don't have our database averages quite yet, I would look at the relative proportion of reflect to persuade. And you can see with this one,
Yeah.
it's 20 points higher with the reflection and persuading. And so when I see that fairly big gap, what I tell people on the debrief is the risk this person runs is when they take a step back to gather more information, get additional context, ask questions, do observation, they may miss the critical window of then stepping forward and addressing the
Mhm.
conflict in a timely manner.
Mhm.
So when the reflect is that much higher than the persuade, and I think you've probably been in a situation like this yourself, because I know I have, where I'm in a conflict maybe on a Wednesday. The person who I had the conflict with is off Thursday and Friday, and I'm sort of thinking it through how I want to address this. And then I get sick on Monday, and then I come back on Tuesday, and I'm like, well, I feel like I kind of missed the boat. It's going to be awkward if I bring this up now, so I'm just going to let it slide,
Mhm.
right? And that's sort of the risk I would say we run if our reflect score is a fair bit higher than the persuade. Is we might just wait too long to
Mm.
go after it with someone to really solve it.
Good. Another thing, I'm sort of formulating a hypothesis here. Of course, we don't have all the other assessments to compare it to, but I'm also wondering, might we have a little bit of that people pleaser thing going on?
Mm.
Because we have relatively high concede, we got the empathize, and then even when they go green, it's on the connecting side. So I'm already
Mhm.
thinking maybe a high S. Good team player, doesn't want to rock the boat, and will often just kind of smooth things over, right? What do you guys think of that?
I would fully say that that's a valid hypothesis. And to that point, even remembering that asserting here is about setting boundaries, just like Jared
Yeah,
said.
yeah,
Do they know how to set boundaries? Do they
right.
know how to say no? Do they know how to say, this is what I want? And
Mhm.
if they do that too little, it's always going to be about, appeasing other people or
Yeah.
just
Mhm.
trying to make everyone feel happy, which ultimately, again, that can not get the team to where they have to go. Right.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. And even like let's just say this was a pre-hire assessment, just to the points that you, Steve, were making and Claire that you were making. This is the exact profile I would expect to see for somebody who goes into a job and says, I'm the brand new person. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to
Yeah.
make waves. I'm going to go along to get along. And if they don't have the relational equity to really connect with people, then they're going to do a lot of conceding
Yeah. Yeah.
on that. And then once they've sort of made relational equity with people and they feel like they can have one-on-one conversations to say, maybe I would do it differently. Have you thought about this? Or here's some of the things I was thinking about. Here's a 5-step plan I think we can use that's maybe different than what you suggested in the meeting, right? That's those connect type sort of conversations. They won't have those at first
Yeah.
until they feel like they have relational equity with people. And so they're just going to be giving ground. And if you know that in a pre-hire environment and you want to move forward and hire this person, then you're already equipped with the knowledge that this person probably should be coached pretty early on to get some assertiveness training, perhaps. That should be on your radar very early with this person to get them a bit more comfortable being the assertive person in the workplace. So I think that's one of the values of what we're looking at.
Awesome. Yeah, really like that, connecting the dots there. That's fantastic. Good. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here, and Jared, Clara, thanks to both of you for your work in helping, conceive of this idea and then bring it to reality and walking us through it. Very excited to see more and more people using this. I think we would all say, if you're out there and you're still wanting to figure out, hey, I need some help reading this, making sense of this, please don't hesitate to reach out. We love working with our FBI alumni and people in the Bartell family with all these assessments. But we hope this has been helpful to you. Jared, Clara, thank you for your insight here. Really good, really good. I learned a lot, so appreciate both of you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. And like I said at the outset, I think we'll have to do this again sometime. So
yeah, sounds awesome. Thank you, Steve.
All right. For more information on the new conflict management style assessment or other Bartell and Bartell products and services, contact us at bartellbartell.com or call 814-861-6606.